So, this is a part of our series here today where we're going to talk about reparenting as an anxious attachment style so that you don't have to feel so needy or afraid or anxious when it comes to love and dating. And by not feeling so needy or anxious or afraid when it comes to dating, you will find yourself clinging less, holding on too tightly a lot less, and not pushing people away as much, which will actually increase your chances very dramatically of having long lasting, thriving relationships because so much of your healing and inroad to becoming securely attached is about learning to self soothe, learning to reparent the things that were parented inconsistently in your life, because that's such a big theme. So let's unpack what reparenting is, and we'll dive into an exercise in a little bit that we can do together. So, first and foremost, to really dive into the topic of reparenting, we need to define what it is. Okay. And one of my favorite quotes that relates to reparenting is from Dr. Gabor Maté. And Dr. Gabor Maté says, trauma are two things: the things that happened that shouldn't have happened, but also the things that didn't happen that should have happened. What does that mean? Well, trauma on one hand is the obvious, right? The things that happened that shouldn't have happened. If somebody was in an abusive relationship, right, or had a really unhealthy childhood where somebody was constantly screaming at them, or, these things, those are the obvious, right? The things that happened that shouldn't have happened. In a perfect world, that would not be taking place in a household. But it's also the things that didn't happen that should have happened. For example, if you grow up in a household where there's complete neglect, children are wired for attachment, for attunement, for closeness, for connection. They're wired to need to feel like they belong to somebody, like they're at the center of somebody's universe, like it's safe to be themselves and to connect and to lean on somebody. And if somebody grows up in a household where there's an absence of that, that is also traumatic. But those are usually the traumas that are more hidden, right? That are more subtle, that people don't recognize as much because they're not so overt and obvious. It's more about the things that are deeply missing. So, how this relates to reparenting is literally about us as adults. And I really believe this. I believe that this is an important rite of passage that we all go through, that some people spend their whole lives not even knowing. But I believe that we all have a rite of passage where we have to be able to give to ourselves what we didn't get. In other words, we have to become our own parents. And until you do, you will find yourself in a position where you resent or get frustrated for things you didn't have and blame other people in your life for it. Now, I want to break this down, okay? There's this old quote, and this quote says, the more dependency that we have fostered on another person, the more likely it is that that person will eventually become our adversary. What does that mean? Well, the more dependency that you have on another person, the more you're essentially going to expect a lot from them, right? You like need them to do things for you because you depend on them. But people are not perfect, and they're definitely not mind readers, and they're not always going to get it right. So then the moment that person doesn't get it right, we suffer. And who do we blame the suffering on? The person we're hyper dependent on. And thus, as a result of that, you're going to find that that person in your mind then becomes your adversary. Now, you see this across all these different places. You see this with a parent and child and how much this pertains to the idea of reparenting. You see this in, a workplace with an employer employee. You see this between very codependent partners and relationships. That is something that is deeply aligned. Okay. These are things that really have their roots here. So how do we stop that from happening? Well, I think that it's also equally important to recognize that the things in our own personal lives that we struggle with the most because we weren't parented around these things in a healthy way are the very same things that we tend to or try to outsource the most onto others. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're an anxious attachment style, just to make the example very clear. And let's say that you are in a position where you didn't get proper consistency growing up. So you didn't learn to self-soothe. Well, because you're in learned helplessness, you don't have that foundation of knowing how to soothe yourself. Guess what you do? You outsource it onto other people. You're like, everybody should soothe me. My partner should be responsible for how I feel. If you're a fearful avoidant and you had your internal baseline of trust fragmented or fractured, you didn't learn to trust because you didn't see healthy consistency or congruency in your upbringing. Well, then what do? You're like, nobody ever can tell any lie or nobody can ever be incongruent. If the story changes, oh my gosh, it's a violation. And we put a lot of pressure on those things because we are trying to get everybody to be perfect around us to solve for the fact that we don't know how to trust, right? And that was my experience when I was a fearful avoidant. I was like, everybody's story better line up, every detail better line up all the time because I don't want to have to feel like these wounds of trust. Now, as a dismissive avoidant, a lot of dismissive avoidants are like, I need the perfect partner where there's no conflict ever because a lot of dismissive avoidants don't know how to move through conflict. Okay, so how does this all come into reparenting? How does this connect back? Well, we have to learn to self-source in healthy ways, even for dismissive avoidance, the things that we didn't get healthy conditioning around. And that is a huge form of reparenting. So let's go back to this idea that trauma are the things that happened that shouldn't have happened, okay? But also the things that didn't happen that needed to happen, okay? On the one hand, this is kind of more obvious, right? The things that happened that shouldn't have happened. The reparenting process for this is to look at the things that were painful to you and what you made them mean about yourself, okay? Every time we go through a traumatic event or a painful situation, we give meaning to that event about ourselves. So as an example, if a dismissive avoidant growing up was shamed for being vulnerable and expressing their emotions. They were told, oh, don't be such a crybaby. Children should be seen and not heard. Get out of here. We don't have time for this. Don't be such a baby. Like these types of things. A child goes, okay, my emotions are shameful. Thus, because these are an inherent part of myself, I am shameful. I am defective. And I am weak if I show these things. Now, guess what some of the biggest core wounds are that create this dysfunction in a relationship that the dismissive avoidant has with themselves as an adult and thus with other people. These core wounds, these ideas that I'm defective or something's wrong with me or I'm weak if I show too much of my emotion. Okay. And then what happens is as an adaptation to believing, thinking, feeling these things because of their own early conditioning, not because they chose that, not because they raised their hand and said, this is how I'd like to feel for my whole life, because that was literally how they were taught to be conditioned. Okay. Those are the patterns that literally got conditioned into them. Dismissive avoidants go to great lengths as adults to hide themselves, to not be seen, to not really share their emotions, because that's how they've adapted to that conditioning. Okay. Now, the root of rewiring that is to rewire those belief systems. Okay, we're not born with these belief systems. They get fired and wired into us through repetition and emotion over time. It's that firing and wiring, that repetition and emotion that actually create those neural pathways and neural networks. And we have to change the story and do it repeatedly enough that we stop believing that. We have to see how emotions are strong and courageous, or vulnerabilities takes a lot of courage and it connects us instead of gets us shamed and seen as weak, right? So we have to be able to change that narrative within ourselves is a big step towards healing. I have a lot of videos on this channel about that, so I'm not going to go too far into that right now. I'm going to focus on this video on the other form of reparenting, which is giving to ourselves what we didn't get. So I want to take you through this exercise because this is actually going to blow your mind a little bit, I think. I'm hoping that this is like a huge aha moment for you. Okay, so I want to talk about these major threads, right? So hopefully in review, you're starting to see that what we didn't get in childhood, we end up not really giving to ourselves. And then we invest in people who are very unlikely to give them to us as well. Okay. So you'll see this whole dynamic. So I took the liberty of starting this exercise for us. Okay. Conditioning from childhood. So the first question I want you to ask yourself for this exercise, and I filled in some common examples for anxious attachment styles, but you can really like sit with this one and see what comes up for you. What were the biggest unmet needs that you had from your childhood? Okay, so think about things that you were really yearning for a lot, the things that you constantly found yourself looking back on being like, oh, I wish I had that. I really wanted this. The things that you found yourself always pushing or driving towards. And usually there are things like this. There are things like consistent soothing in childhood, feeling wanted, feeling special, feeling important or deeply seen, feeling a sense of certainty. This is a huge one for anxious attachment styles, feeling reassured or validated. And it's not that anxious attachment styles don't get these things, it's that they get these things very inconsistently, which just makes you feel more in lack. It's like intermittent reinforcement. Intermittent reinforcement for context here is like what gamblers get addicted to, right? It's like sometimes you get it, then sometimes it's taken away. And that intermittency actually lights up a lot of the reward pathways in your brain, causing you to want things that much more And so you'll see this inconsistency essentially creates a lot of craving, but also a sense of learned helplessness because you crave from the outside in, which then causes you to not develop those skills internally to self-soothe or to make yourself feel special or like a priority, right? Think of specialness as like prioritized, okay? So these are common ones. Look at what else comes up for your life uniquely, okay? And then I want you to actually go through question number 2, how much you struggle to meet these needs in the relationship to yourself. Okay. So, how much, for example, do you consistently soothe yourself from 1 to 10? And a lot of you are going to be like, oh my gosh, a 1, like hardly at all. I'm not very consistent at soothing myself. How much do you make yourself feel wanted or special or prioritized? And you might see, okay, wait, I don't really make myself feel like that at all. In fact, I'm constantly telling myself how I'm not good enough, how, I need to spend time with other people. I don't want to spend much time with myself, right? So if people mirror that back to you, they would make you feel unwanted. Are you doing that to you, right? And maybe you're like, wow, pretty low. How much do I make myself feel special or prioritize the relationship to myself, time to myself for my needs? Maybe again, you're like a 2 out of 10. And you'll start to see why when these things are so low, we yearn for them so much outside of us. And it fosters a lot of dependency on anybody who will meet them at all, and even causes you to stay in the wrong relationships for very long periods of time, perhaps, or to put up with people who have a lot of red flags and to lower your standards. Because if you're starving for something so much, you'll take the breadcrumbs, right? You're like, I'm starving, give me the breadcrumbs. If you give me a little bit of soothing, but more than I soothe myself, if somebody gives me 4 out of 10 soothing, or makes me feel wanted 3 out of 10, well, it's a heck of a lot more than I'm giving to myself now. So let me just keep going back to that person. And sometimes that can cause us to stay in the wrong or unhealthy relationships. Then what we're going to do, and so you're going to go through all of these, right? We're then going to take a look at some of these more common ones. And we're going to talk about how you can start meeting these needs in the relationship to yourself. Okay. So self-soothing looks a lot like honoring your emotions, like hearing them out, checking in with them, being with them, like being able to just be present with your emotions and asking what I need to feel better when I don't feel good, and then executing on that, right? So, what that looks like more specifically is, let's say you are feeling stressed about something. And maybe you're feeling stressed that you're like overwhelmed in a situation. You feel like a lot of people expect things from you. You might sit and go, okay, what am I feeling? Okay, I feel overwhelmed. Okay, let me just notice the overwhelm in my body for a second, actually allow myself to feel it and to hear my emotions communicating to me. Okay, well, what do I need to feel better? Oh, I need to set a boundary with this person so that I'm not taking all of this stuff on. Okay, well then let me go execute and have that conversation. And that's you soothing yourself, right? You're listening to your emotions as feedback and you're taking what feedback they're giving to you and doing something with it to correct how you feel, right? And it's not that how you feel is incorrect, it's that it's trying to give you a message and you have to be there to decode it and show up for yourself. Okay. Validation. This could be like acknowledging your daily wins, right? Like it can be something really simple, like sitting down and having a little ritual at the end of the day. Feeling seen can be things you do through meditation, checking in with your emotions more often, journaling about your feelings at the end of the day. Certainty can be you having more organization and structure in your life. So you feel this sense of groundedness or certainty. Reassurance can be you actually, if you're giving yourself a hard time or you're thinking, oh, this person doesn't like me, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, actually pausing and reframing that and being like, wait, why do I deserve great connection? What traits do I bring to the table? Who am I really? Being able to actually meet some of these needs within yourself is something securely attached people naturally do well. And it's part of what allows them to stop coming from this eternal place of lack in their relationships so that they're not putting so much pressure on people to do this for them because they have the capacity to do this within themselves. And as a result of that, they're way less triggered. They're way better at upholding their standards and actually trying to make sure that they vet people properly in relationships. In other words, like they really make sure that if they're going to invest in somebody, that's a healthy person to invest in. They're checking in to learn about the person, to really see that that person's going to value them back and show up in healthy ways. And they're asking questions to determine that. Like these are things that when you learn to reparent these things within yourself, you'll see a lot of the neediness die down. You'll see a lot of that anxiety in relationships melt away. You will see that you're able to suddenly be more present in relationships and also set boundaries and say no to things that are not healthy or not working for you. and you'll appear so much more confident as a result, and you'll feel that way too. Now, if you want to go way deeper into this, I have a whole reparenting course you can check out fully for free for a limited time. I will put that link down below. It goes really in depth. And there's exercises in a workbook. You can actually use the link down below and spin to win, where you may even be able to win a whole free membership, which gives you access to that course, or just a 7 or 14-day membership plus a free course for life. There's different like things that you can do there, but no matter what, when you go into your dashboard, just type in reparenting and that course will come up and you'll have full free access to it. Whether it's for 7 days, 14 days, a full free membership, you will get to see below. So that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe so you don't miss the other videos in this series. Share this with somebody who might benefit. And thank you so much for watching.